Hey, yo, everyone, gather around. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and A Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A Conscious Party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Well, welcome to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Thanks to the audience members that have stuck around. We had a little bit of difficulties getting started. But one thing I always say about podcasting, if something doesn't go wrong, then I don't know what's up. Because pretty much every episode, there's some kind of technical dilemma or some kind of issue going on, and we just got to work through it. But I'm happy to have Shara join me this morning. How are you, Shara?
I am doing well. I can't complain. How are you?
I'm pretty good. As you can see behind me, it's quite beautiful out there. But I have to say, driving here, they have it's actually a tourist spot because of it shows at the university, they have a big thing that shows, the time and the temperature. And so people go and take pictures by it when it's really cold. And it was minus 28 on the way here this morning. So it looks beautiful out there, and it is, but it comes with some blustering coldness. You have some, is it snowing? Is there snow on the ground in Philly?
Yes, we haven't had snow in about 2 years, so I wasn't very excited about it, but my kids were. They were. So yeah, it's about 4 to 6 inches is what we got. That's all. It's actually bright and sunny here, so I'm going to cross my fingers that there's not much any more snow. I'm not a big fan of it. Not anymore.
It doesn't actually snow that much here, but the thing is that it's so cold that the snow never melts, right? So it accumulates over the whole winter, gets deeper and deeper. But I went to Philly one time for, are you familiar? You ever heard of the MOVE organization?
I have.
Yeah, I went there. I was, when I was a graduate student in Hawaii, I went there and I had made some relationships doing some research and with the whole Mumia Abu Jamal thing going on, but I made a lot of friends with the MOVE organization, and so I went to Philadelphia for that, and it was a great experience. I was very warm welcome from everyone there. I hear Philly has an interesting reputation, kind of the city of brotherly love, but also what is it that they threw snowballs at Santa Claus or something at the Eagles game? What's the flavor in Philly like these days?
Oh, I guess it depends. I mean, I'm in the house most of the time, so I wouldn't know too much unless I go out to feel like eating. But other than that, because I work from home. But ever since the Eagles game, a little bit not as good since we lost. We're out of the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, it's here. Everyone's pretty much inside. No one likes the cold here. A lot more people are indoors than right now. But soon, about March or April, people will start coming out right after springtime. So it's pretty chill right now. Not many people come out. You'll see some people in the early morning. I live near University of Pennsylvania, so I'm in University City District. So there's a lot of university students that are out and about. I don't know how they do it, but other than that, it's pretty chill here. Not much going on. I'm in the house most of the time, thank God. So, so I wouldn't know.
Well, tell us a little about yourself. You're a former psychotherapist, and now you're a licensed clinical social worker. Do you do most of your work via telehealth?
Yes, so I am no longer a therapist. I was a therapist. Last time I was there was 2019. I've been in the entrepreneur space about 3.5 years now. So thank God I don't have to go outside. So I have a business called Journey Licensure where I do clinical supervision. Most people on LinkedIn and cross platforms know me for the exam coaching that I do for all 3 exams. And I also work for LinkedIn as a LinkedIn advisor. I'm also their top voice in social work on the platform. So I do a lot of awareness across social work across different platforms. I'm on like 7 of them. So, but LinkedIn is my main hub, and then TikTok and a couple others. So I'm also an author as well. So yeah, I'll kind of pause there.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a lot going on. Well, tell us about it. What's up with
Yes.
What's up with your entrepreneurial spirit? What do you have going on?
Yeah.
With clinical supervision, tell us about that.
Yeah, I have a caseload small, about 6 students. I do individual and group supervision that's contracted through a couple of agencies. So I do that to kind of keep my hands in social work because I'm kind of removed from it, unless I am doing licensing and talking about scenarios of my experience. I'm a former psychotherapist of 18 years, so I had that underneath my belt. I left the field physically in a way because I wanted to spend more time with my children. I spent most of my time away from my youngest, who's now almost 10. But when I was trying to in the grind of getting my hours done, it took about a good 6 or 7 years to even get there. Post grad, 9 years, almost 10. So it's quite a journey between mommyhood and trying to get through everything else. So when I finally got my hours, I was like, well, I'm going to transition. I may want to go to private practice. I never did. So I ended up going into the entrepreneur mistake, probably almost, I don't want to say by mistake, but I started sharing my story of how I struggled with my licensing process from the time I got my master's at Howard 10 years ago all the way up until I sat for the boards. I struggled with standardized testing academically. Historically, I have ADHD, a learning disorder, and as well as generalized anxiety disorder. I didn't find out till the ADHD until I took my exam the second time for my clinical. But because of the story that I told and how much time it took, a lot of life issues that happened along the way, it blew up on LinkedIn and it birthed my business during the licensure, which it's been 3 years now, a whirlwind, but pretty busy. I pretty much was able to marry my social work experience, my counseling experience, as well as my personal understanding of the struggles with the exam, with coming up with a methodology that students could use that's different than self-study programs or tutors. And so far, it's been quite a journey, quite busy. So yeah, that's the short version of it.
Yeah, sounds like it. So bring in some of my personal experience is that I struggled with school and exams my entire life from, since I was a little kid until I was an adult. And I never really knew why. And then I read a book by Dr. Gabor Mate on ADHD, or ADD and ADHD. And I pretty much self-diagnosed myself as having ADD. And my problem oftentimes was not that I didn't know the information or whatever. It was that I wasn't able to really focus for long periods of time. And it really plagued me my whole life. So how do you work with somebody that's, say, preparing for an exam, but they're struggling with ADD tendencies?
Well, it's one of my 23 specializations. I specialize in ADHD as well as having it. A lot of times with ADHD, if they have a combined type, I do have both. Um, it's mostly trying to teach them skills that they can work in short periods of time, as well as giving them structure, but a lot of support. I had a client, her name was Stephanie, and she lived in Boston, and we worked virtually. And for the time that I worked with her, she kept missing her exam prior to getting to me by 1 point. But I met her, she was on her third try. And she hyper focused a lot. So she did very well on her practice exam, but would run out of time. Mind you, she had a combination. She had about 5 hours. So I remember once we were done our whole entire process, our structure, our study plan, she would get on-call telephonic support from me outside of session when she needed it. And I worked a lot with her in terms of just her anxiety, because a lot of times with ADHD, the sister diagnosis is anxiety. So teaching her how to emotionally regulate herself, as well as making sure she had an understanding of her material based on her cognitive process. As you know, ADHD is a different beast when it comes to your brain, and how it processes the information. And it can vary from person to person, even if they have the same diagnosis. So really understanding what her learning style was key, and then tailoring her process to her that would work along with her lifestyle. She had a very demanding job. She was often very anxious, often would forget a lot of things. So we talked about some of the naturalistic things that she could do to increase her cognitive functioning, talking about plant-based nootropics that she could use to help her. And no, not marijuana. Everybody think, whenever I talk about that, people are like, are you talking about marijuana? No, CBD and different types of cognitive natural supplements that she could use to increase her brain power. She was on ADHD stimulant medication. I'm personally on Strateer, which is not non-stimulant. I know I can't do stimulants because I'll be jumping off the walls and still won't be focused. But for her, having more of a holistic perspective of what could work and having a lot of patience also helped. She, on a Sunday, I'll never forget, a week before her exam, she actually just really was struggling with trying to get through her test in a time fashion, even though she had an extra hour. So I sat with her for 5 hours on my day off. I said, we have worked together for 3 months. You have done very well. I need to know what the disconnection is. So I sat with her on Zoom. She was on the other end. I pretended to be her test proctor. And every question I said, okay, you look at it once, look at it twice, move on, move on, move on. We did that for about 5 hours. Then she passed the practice exam, and then she took the actual exam. About 4 days later, she passed. So having that type of support was very different than what a tutor is going to do, which only is really an hour and practice questions from all over. My process is more structured to the person that I'm working with. I've had a variety of different colleagues who didn't even know that they had academic or intellectual difficulties, and I would assess them beforehand to see what would work for them. I've had clients that were blind. I've had clients that were also deaf that I've worked with. Now, I don't know American Sign Language, but I have worked with an interpreter to help them, and it's worked. So 3 years, about over 3,000 social workers later, one-on-one and group coaching, as well as having a podcast that I run live group podcasting sessions through, has been a majority of the reinforcement that my clients get in terms of having a community. So if they're in group, not only are they seeing me in one-to-one, I run TikTok classes, usually doing lives on other platforms, as well as doing a Clubhouse podcasting group that I do that's uploaded. It's like over 165 episodes there. So they get a lot of tips and strategies. I've had people pass their exams from that podcast alone when I first started. And it's only been a year. This is my second year of podcasting. So we're now on season 2. So it's been, when I mean it's been a whirlwind, it really has. I'm hoping to present to NASW this year to show some of the work that I've been doing with my colleagues and the need for a more tailored approach, especially for the social workers that really struggle, either busy parents. I once worked with a guy, he had 6 kids. His name is Jermaine. He's a program director in New York, and he really struggled. He needs somebody to keep him accountable. He needed structure. He needed support. Tutors aren't really built for that, nor do they have that type of skill. With self-study programs, which there's a lot of them out there, sometimes they miss the mark with people that have learning disorders or cognitive disabilities, or really just need that accountability, especially for people of color. There was a firestorm actually professionally in our organization about the 3 people that don't pass the exam from a 10-year study that was done. And that created a lot of conversation about some of the barriers with the exam that even go beyond just how it's formed, but even the biases in the questions and whatnot. So I really wanted to spend my time trying to fill in the gaps. So for the last 3 years, mostly clinical supervision I just started doing, but most of my dedication post my license process was committing myself to helping as many people pass as I could. So I know I kind of went on for a little bit,
No,
but
no worries.
yeah.
There's a question in the chat that I think was why we were talking about, since we're on the topic of ADHD. Fawn asks, what are some strategies you have used yourself as a person with combined ADHD?
Oh boy. Yeah. So I have on medication. I started exercising and I fell off of that for a while. But I do meditate, a lot of emotional regulation. I still struggle with, inattention. I wear a lot of different hats. So I call kind of ADHD my superpower. But I also know that when I burn out, like I can be hyper focused on a project, get it done, and then I'm done. Uh, I won't do anything for a while. So I would just say medication was very helpful for me. But before that, when I was untreated for most of my life, I got diagnosed at 32, 33. So most of my life, I had to compensate for it through rewriting. In school, it was rewriting my notes. It was trying to compensate for how I learned using a lot of supports when I was in the academic world. But now it's mostly emotional regulation, keeping a list of things. I have a beautiful partner, my fiance, who I've known for 20 years, and he pretty much lets me know, like, hey, Shara, you're either you're all over the place or you're giving me the same thing you gave me 20 times ago. He'll let me know. So having support, it's even hard for your loved ones to really understand ADHD because your brain works so differently. Um, but being patient with yourself, um, finding time to focus on your mental health and even see if you can find a counselor or that specializes in ADHD. I didn't have that. When I became ADHD diagnosed officially, I started wanting to know everything that I could about it because I didn't know I had it. Mind you, I've been a therapist for 18 years. But the two top things what I would say is definitely medication. Some people don't like medication. I did a non-stimulant, which most people don't know about. The common medication you hear about, Ritalin, of course, a lot of the kids use that. For me, it's more so emotional regulation and treating my anxiety, as well as making sure that I stay organized and not put too much on myself. Because if I do, I get overwhelmed and nothing gets done. But I think the behavioral interventions are going to change from person to person. So for me, it's been more so holistic in making sure I keep my anxiety down, making sure that I take care of myself, whether that's eating healthy, whether that's making sure I take breaks, because I do a lot of different things. And as much as I do them, I can run myself ragged real quick. Like I'll run 12 to 14-hour days, fine. But then when I burn out, it's over. So, but the one thing would be just making sure that I meditate every single day, because if I don't, I become more reactive quickly, which is not good because I can fire off at the mouth. So being very aware of keeping my energy, protecting it, has been really key for my ADHD. But I also I let people know I still struggle with it. You know, I still have my moments where I just can't do nothing. And my business definitely depends on me being able to stay organized. To give you a prime example of the hyperactivity to the listener, I wrote two books back to back, 3 months apart. They were 100 pages each. They both became Amazon bestsellers. And I hyper focused so much, I have not read a book since that time at all because I burned out. I was just like, I'm not ready. I don't even know how I did that because now I can't even look about writing another book right now. So for projects and hyper focusing, it worked. The back end of that is the burnout. So the other part is how do I prevent burning out? How do I make sure that I prioritize the things I need to in order to take care of myself? So I know that was a mouthful. Hopefully he takes what he can from he or she. But it's been mostly just because I don't see a therapist anymore. My therapist pretty much kicked me to the curb. She said, "You don't need my help anymore. We're done." Um, but it's mostly keeping my stress level manageable, not getting rid of it, but manageable and taking breaks when I need it.
Yeah, thank you. I have a follow-up question. Do you see any ties between like traumatic life experience and ADHD or ADD?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a huge connection. If I could use myself as a case study, um, academically, because my son, he doesn't have ADHD, and we know that ADHD sometimes can be have a genetic uploading. Um, I perceive that my mother has it, along with untreated anxiety. But my son, who's 9, he does not have it. So if I were to think about Liv Vygotsky's social learning theory, um, having a nurturing environment for how kids learn is important. For me, my learning environment was very traumatic. My father was a military man. I would go be scared to even sit at the table. As I said, I have 3 disorders. So the math learning disorder was actually born, I think, partially from that experience of being with my father. And if I even got anything wrong, it was a backhand. Like he really didn't have the patience. And as I got older, most people think I would hate school, but I excelled at it. However, there was an ongoing underlying undercurrent of anxiety, even academically when I got to college. I'm a first gen college student, was first generation to go to school out of 5 kids. So there's a lot of pressure there to excel and do well because my other siblings are watching. And then going to grad school, no one in my family has gotten a master's degree. So there was another layer of pressure to do well. And then pursuing a doctorate very soon. Not as much pressure at all, but in the grand scheme of having traumatic experiences, it can exacerbate those symptoms. My son does not have any of it, and he is a straight A, fourth grade student, no inactivity, no memory issue deficits, none of that. And I really wanted to make sure as he was learning that he was in a nurturing environment and he's doing very well. I'm not seeing any signs of it. But for me, it was very traumatic. For my brother, that's right behind me, he goes to Columbia University. His experience was just the same as mine. And he has that as well, as along with anxiety. And my sister. So the first three of us. So I do think there is a pathological connection between the two.
Yeah, sure.
I know that was a long-winded answer.
No, I
But there you go.
appreciate it. And I think, on issues like this where I think people are familiar with the terms ADD, ADHD, but there's a lot of us that don't really, we don't have at least as far as we know, we don't have a direct connection. And then it's just kind of esoteric. We're not really sure. We hear things about it. And I think there's 2 comments in here that I think are worth bringing up. Nico says, I feel like I can relate to this. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but this definitely has me considering getting an evaluation to see. And then Ben says, how do you get diagnosed? Or a better question is, how do you know you have ADHD? So let me add to that a little bit. So let's say you have somebody and either you notice some signs or they come to you and they say, I think, I've been reading about ADHD and I think I have some signs. What would you advise them? What are the next steps? Would you have them get an evaluation?
Yeah, I would. So 2 things. I always like this storytelling, so I always like to give stories along. So when I see my colleagues and for assessment before they do licensing coaching with me, a lot of times they would have taken the exam several times, and after a while, I'm like, there's a disconnect there. And I'll ask them about their academic history. I'll ask them, have they ever had memory deficits? I'll ask them, about getting tasks done. I'll ask them specific questions about, their focus. And there's surprisingly a lot of them really struggle with tasks. They can be great multitaskers to a degree, and they'll share a lot about their cognitive deficits. So those are 2 things that I look for when it comes to ADHD. Not so much the hyperactivity part, because as adult ADHD does not look like someone just moving around a lot. It shows up more in impulsivity in terms of their regulation of self. So I would say in terms of getting diagnosed, if you feel that you're having more inattention, lack of focus, why not? I know when I got my evaluation done, it was by the same neuropsychologist that saw me when I was 21 years old. And she said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I wish we would have diagnosed you back then, but your anxiety was so high, we kind of overlooked those symptoms. So I was like, well, that's great. It would save me a lot of grief when I went to grad school. But why not? It's never too late to get diagnosed. A lot of people that I run to, it's like, oh my God, what good is this going to do me now? Getting diagnosed. I've made a specific life change once I did, and realizing how those symptoms not only affected me, but affected everyone around me. So I would call your behavioral health line on the back of your insurance card, just as if you were looking for a therapist. Find out who you're panel with, and see if you can ask for either a neuropsychologist or a psychiatrist. They can also diagnose you with ADHD as well. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. What about, I want to ask about medication real quick while we're still on the topic. I think for me, I've always been very hesitant to medication. And then I'd read, I've as a, social work scholar, I've read plenty of things about, how there's so many children that are diagnosed and then prescribed stimulants as a result, more than I think the rest of the countries in the world combined. But then when I had, like I said, I had read a few things like the book from Dr. Gabor Mate on ADHD, and he highly advocated for medication. He was somebody that I trusted in how he said things. And then I started seeing anecdotal evidence from a lot of other people, whether it was on Twitter or social media or whatever, and people would say, I could never organize my mind in the morning. I'd wake up and not know how to do things. And I got on medication. And is this how normal people live? Because life is much easier for me now. And so I've had to give medication in this regard a much closer look, and not just, I think I took for granted that it might actually be very useful. What do you think about that?
I'm sitting there just snickering. So when I think of some of the TikTok, I love TikTok. A lot of some of the parodies, videos around ADHD, you kind of remind me. I'm playing them in my head as if we're talking. Just, I think so. For me, there was a lot of stigma. One, I'm a Black woman, and secondly, stigma around medication. So for me, it took me not just ADHD, it took me almost most of my life. I'll be 38 in another month to take medicine, because then you're like, you come to terms that is there something really wrong with me? I'm having to take something to alleviate this, and it took, even as a licensed mental health professional, it took me a while to get to that point. But I was at a point of, if I didn't do it, then I would not progress in my career. Would I have done it if my career wasn't on the line? I don't know. But at that point, I was, willing to try anything. I think medicine has a place for it because you're missing a crucial neurotransmitter. You're missing dopamine. So that's one of the ones that we need. Your brain is missing those neurotransmitters in order to get things done, in order to focus. It's part of the executive functioning, so we need that. I think medication does have a place. Is it for everybody? No. Some people can just do behavioral interventions and be fine. But if it gets to a point where you feel that you want to try it, talk to a psychiatrist about it. That's what I did. I actually told my psychiatrist I do not want to be on a stimulant, because for me, stimulants, Jay would just have me jumping off the wall. I have generalized anxiety disorder. Not going to work. So for me, I chose Shara. It does take longer to get into the system, about 2 or 3 weeks, I believe. But for me, it was a go. So it really depends on, of course, your how your body metabolizes the medication and what you feel is going to work for you. But yeah, it's not for everybody, but for me, yeah, thank God. I'm better functioning now than I was probably most of my life. But compensating for it was hard. I graduated with honors in both my degrees, and most people like, you did very well. If I if I look back at a lot of my old organizers, they were like color coded. It was crazy looking. And I'm like, oh my God, I was really, really, there was something really going on. But at the time, I thought it was normal to study 6-8 hours per day. That was also the change when it came to my licensing. I went from studying 8 hours a day to an hour and a half. Big change.
Yeah. So there's a couple comments I want to read real quick, and then could push forward a little bit. So Charlie says, through the VA, I had to get a referral from primary care to get connected with psych behavioral health, and they were the ones who did my evaluation and diagnosed me with ADHD at 29 years old. It was a long wait, so it was helpful to look up suggestions of what has helped others to try out some different strategies in the meantime. And I'm sure there's plenty of information out there in this day and age, like that's good advice, Charlie, to look and see what other folks are doing. And then Fawn adds, medication for my children with ADHD. My son was diagnosed with ADHD when he was 5. We were extremely hesitant to start medication. We did dietary changes, motivation, schedule changes, everything else. And then we tried medication, 100% game changer. He's 14 and still struggles, but benefits so much from medication. Yes, thank God for medications.
I can imagine. 14, wow. Yeah. And then the brain is still developing too, so there's that. But I think medication and behavioral interventions combined work better than just one or the other. But it's very situational depending on who you talk to and what their lifestyle is like. Um, but yeah, I mean, kudos to the parent for getting help for their child. I wish my parents would have done that. I mean, my parents were young and they didn't know, especially with math, because that's kind of where the process of me figuring out that something's going on. I did poorly in math, and when I got to college, I couldn't pass above a basic math class, and that's when the professor said, "Hey, I think you need to go see someone about it." So I went, and I'm like, I don't need to go. I'm an honor student, blah blah blah. But I went, and I found out a lot more about how my brain processes information. And over a decade and some, well, 15 years later, it's still information I'll go back and refresh myself because even if I'm not using it in academia, when it comes to my business and how I function, how I process information, it gives me a lot more insight from a physiological standpoint. And I wish everybody could have that type of information to know how their brain functions. Because with neuropsychology, they can figure those things out. It's not cheap, uh, but it was worth the journey. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. I think my advice to people too is if you're struggling with something and you think you might need some help, well, I mean, look at it like this. When I was a kid, I could never, like, I had trouble focusing when they would ever write something on the board or something like that. And later, when I was an adult, I found out, well, I couldn't see the board. And so I was operating from a deficit this entire time. You know what I mean? And I think that can be similar with things like ADD, ADHD, is that we can have things that are going on that are not necessarily our fault. And they struggle, they contribute to us struggling, whether that's with education, focusing, work, even relationships. And we're hard on ourselves and we internalize it, but oftentimes there's ways, that we can overcome those trials. And it's not something that's per se wrong with us. It's just something that we need to work on or something that we need a little help with. I want to remind that if you're in the audience, you're welcome to use the chat. We're coming up on the hour mark, so if you would like to call in, the call-in lines are open. We'd appreciate your questions. Shara, you mentioned a couple times that you have a couple of books. I'm wondering if you mind talking about them at all.
Yeah, I do. Well, they're both social work journals, so they're specific to social workers that are either spiritual or they need a kind of a mindset boost. So the first one is called 90 Days of Prayer, which it was birthed out of my depression journey of getting through the exam. I missed the clinical exam the first time by 2 points. And then the pandemic hit, lost my job, was home with 3 kids, doing everything. And I fell into a really deep depression. The only thing that was my saving grace was picking up Nintendo Switch at the time and playing Animal Crossing. I played it a lot, during that time. And I think a lot of people did. It was a very popular game at that time. Now it's Streamlight Valley. I don't know if you know anything about games, but nonetheless, that was my kind of like my coping mechanism because I couldn't control anything else. Everything was shut down, so I couldn't test again until exactly 1 year later. I tested, and of course, I passed it. But the book was born out of that journey. So the 90s of prayer is more of a spiritual journey on mindset. I would write down prayers and prayer requests and little quotes to myself because I couldn't afford a therapist at the time. I had no insurance. So that book was born out of it. It became a 5-time Amazon bestseller for a couple weeks back in 2022. The second one is 90 Days of Inspiration. It's a part 2 to that journal for social workers that are taking their licensing exams. It is more of an inspirational mindset journal, non-spiritual for people that are not.
And you said they're available on Amazon?
Yep, Amazon, a couple other Barnes and Nobles, a couple other bookstores as well.
Yeah, let's make sure we get that linked up afterwards so that we can put it in the the post recording and everything, so people that are listening, they want to find it. It's easy for them.
Sure.
And I want to say, Anna and Nico, you both mentioned playing video games, but I just want you to know that's no excuse not to do your schoolwork. Just kidding.
Oh no.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, I fell back in love with video games during the pandemic, and when I have the free time, which is barely, I'm trying to put in at least 30 minutes to an hour to be able to disconnect and play. So,
yeah, my kids are still pretty little for video games, but they've got into it a little bit, and we actually have the Animal Crossing game, but we never got into it. It was after the pandemic we got it, and my kids were just a little too young to stay. You know, you got to kind of stay focused on it. But what's this Dreamlight Valley thing you're talking about?
so Dreamlight Valley is similar. That's kind of the hot Animal Crossing replacement. It's replace the animals from Animal Crossing with Disney characters. And unlike Animal Crossing where there's no storyline, Disney Dreamlight Valley, it's really popular. And unlike Animal Crossing, they stopped updating the game, I believe, like a year or so ago. Dreamlight Valley, they add updates and extend the world. So you get different characters. There's a lot, a lot of quests that you can do with each character, and it's more interactive. A lot of kids seem to like that game. Although my son, he's like, no, I don't want to play that. He's all like Call of Duty and PlayStation 5, and I'm not about that life. So, but yeah, and Roblox. A lot of kids know about that. I'm sure your kids probably know about Roblox. But yeah, so it's more of that type of interactive, and a lot of people, even adults, are playing it. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups of adults that play it in their spare time. But it's a really cool Animal Crossing extension. Disney pretty much took Animal Crossing and made it better. So I still love Animal Crossing though, but I don't play it as much anymore since I pretty much beat the game.
Yeah, we'll have to check it out. My kids like Disney, so
Oh yeah, that will keep them 300 hours of gameplay plus the update. It'll keep them busy for sure.
yeah. And it makes me think of back when we were reading Fawn's comment earlier about her child with ADHD. It reminds me to think, like so many of us live in different contexts, right? Like I moved here from Hawaii. If you have a kid in Hawaii, then basically 365 days a year you can get outside and run around. But here, like I said, right now it's minus 28, and I know Fawn lives north of me, so it's cold where she's at too. So different context for a child with ADHD being able to get outside all the time versus being cooped
Oh
up for a
yeah.
while in the winter time. Those are going to have different results, right?
Oh yeah, very different results. I mean, I work from home most of the time. I barely go. I mean, it sounds bad, but unless I have to, I'm not out in these streets. Not in Philly. Um, but unless I'm going to go see family or something like that. But yeah, I mean, for me, gaming. I grew up with games, so gaming for me was always kind of like the kind of a break from all my responsibilities. But after a while, even then, I struggle with the ADHD because I'll get distracted. I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can't. I got to put it down. I can't hyper focus on it for hours, and nor does it keep my attention that long. Um, so it's one of those things that it's a nice reprieve when I can get on it. But for kids and people are in depending on the area. I mean, my son, he gets out. He's out. He's not with me most of the week. He's only with me on the weekend until he comes home from homeschool. So he's homeschooled. So although he doesn't have ADHD, at least I'm not seeing any signs of it now. He has that time to engage and interact with um, my godmother's child, who is around his age, about 11 or 12. But they grew up together, so he has that social connection, or he's playing with his friend on Roblox, and or talking to him on the phone or whatever. But I guess it depends on where you are, your geographical location, what's available to you. But we try to get our kids out a little bit as we can. But in Alaska, I don't know what's happening. And from Hawaii, that's a big jump.
Yeah,
That is a huge jump, man.
it's a big
I don't know
change.
if I would have did that.
Uh, well, Alaska, the weather can be harsh, but the people. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of people too, but many of the people in Alaska are just wonderful, and it's been a pleasure. Um, being able to interact with so many indigenous folks that live in the area and around the state of Alaska. So it's
Oh,
always been a
wow.
privilege. But that cold weather, for sure, it keeps you cooped up. And we had for Fairbanks, all things considered, it's been a pretty mild winter. But like I said, it's gotten super cold, and it's supposed to drop to like minus 43 degrees next Saturday or
Oh,
something like that.
no,
So
no,
I don't know that
no.
I've ever been in
Oh,
minus
yeah.
43. And
Oh, well, you about to find out.
speaking of Charlie, who has another comment in the chat, he just
Mm,
came here from California, and he's spending the semester up here. So I'm curious to talk to Charlie and see how he's
yeah, man.
appreciating or dealing with the weather. But he says, I struggle quite a bit with emotional regulation, mostly
Mm.
impatience with myself when I don't instantly succeed, and negative reactions to unexpected changes in plans. Same, me too, Charlie.
Oh,
What
yes, me
suggestions do you
too.
have for a plan to start for folks trying to get better control of emotional reactions?
Journaling, meditation has been big for me. When I don't meditate, I find that my reactivity is a lot higher. Um, I when I mean by reactivity is pretty much what he said is it's you kind of like you get angry fast and you snap. Sometimes disproportionately to a situation that doesn't require it, but you're not in a place, and that's also part of ADHD, right? So when you're not regulating your emotions, that's that impulsivity piece. Um, so I find that when I do take the time to do breathing, I use Headspace a lot for meditation. Um, now. And so if I do that about once or twice a day, and sometimes I'm like, I'll say in my head, I don't have time for it. I'll make the time for it because I find that when I do it, I'm more of a happy person. So are the people around me. So the mindfulness meditation, even if you do it for a minute or two, and for ADHD, it can be hard, right? So if you can do walking meditation, if you can, go running or any way to kind of get you moving, to get those to get the happy hormones up and running into the brain, you want to do things that are going to help regulate your emotions, finding ways to get that out so it doesn't come out on the wrong people at the wrong time. And believe me, if you could talk to my other half, he would tell you I've had plenty of those moments. But I do find when I do take the time to um, meditate, it does help me regulate my emotions, or when I start exercising, it does help me regulate my emotions because it gives me somewhere to put it and not on the person that's in front of me that I'm talking to.
Yeah, thank you for that. What about you know, like emotional fatigue? Do you ever have folks that you help with that?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, face it myself. And when I was a therapist, and now emotional fatigue, I find that very interesting. I've never heard those two together like that. Usually, when I think of being fatigued emotionally, I think of compassion fatigue or just plain burnout. Um, so when you're exhausted emotionally, it just means that you poured out way too much and not poured enough back into yourself, and you haven't put the boundaries there. So putting boundaries around what you can and cannot do, being able to say no. And it can be hard to do that in the beginning, but I found the more that I do put that in place, the happier I am. May not always be for other people, but I've had points of landing in the hospital when I did not, when everyone else was pleased but myself. It doesn't help anyone and when that happens. So, really putting yourself first and knowing that you are just as important as the people that you're helping, even more so because you're the one helping. So, emotional exhaustion doesn't suit anyone, but making sure that there's healthy boundaries in place for yourself should come first.
Yeah, what are some ways that folks can set up boundaries? That can be a really difficult thing. It's something that can make
hmm
someone uncomfortable just to think about having to set a boundary.
I was always a people pleaser historically, wanting to please everybody, and it crept up in my business. And like I said, I ended up in the hospital for what I thought was panic attacks. It was my anxiety. It was so bad that I thought I was literally having a heart attack. And went to the hospital, was there for 8 hours in the emergency room, and they did every test. They said, there's nothing wrong with you. So I knew it was more somatic and I needed to change it. My blood pressure was high. It had been high for weeks and weeks, dangerously high. Um, it's really important to know that um, it has to start with self-love. That's a hard word for some people, getting comfortable, but there's the old saying that if you can't love yourself, who's going to love you? Um, you got to love yourself enough to put those boundaries in place and know that that's an act of love to yourself to put those in place. And I had to really come to terms with that. I still have issues saying no, but I said, you know what? I have to, because if I don't, then this is going to keep happening and I'm still going to be the one that's suffering. And I've kind of grown some skin in terms of knowing that I matter. And even that was hard.
Do you have any, when you're the whole time you're talking about self-love and whatnot, it makes me think of like, bell hooks would say that you need affirmations. Do you have any
Hmm.
suggestions in that regard? Like, how do you find that within yourself? Because I think, some of us can just really struggle with looking at ourselves that way. And even, I'm not saying literally looking in the mirror, but looking at ourselves in such a way can be
I mean,
challenging.
journaling helped me a lot. Um, because then with me journaling, that was before I mean, that's where the journals came from. When I was depressed, it helped me a lot to get my thoughts out, to be aware of what was feeding those feelings. Um, and understanding the thought feeling connection. Because a lot of times when we have so many thoughts, we don't always realize the behaviors that come out of them are dysfunctional. Um, so if we have a low self-esteem or self-worth about ourselves, it's going to come out. Hence, not having, good boundaries or, becoming what some people would consider a doormat. Journaling helped me a lot. I do love the idea of affirmations. I used them a lot when I was testing. But I also went through a lot of work when it came to seeing a therapist and working through uh, some ego strength activities that I needed to do in order to get to a place of knowing that I mattered. Because I have a history, and as a child of being physically and emotionally abused. So a lot of trauma that I had to sift through to get to the point that I knew that I mattered. And it took most of my life to get there, mind you. So I think it's a lifelong process. It's not just going to be one strategy. I think as you go through life, especially if you have that type of pathology, that type of history, it takes time. And you have to be willing to allow yourself to go through that process in your own time. It's not going to be a magic wand. Let me just do affirmations and we're done. I can do boundaries. It really takes, a lot of you looking at yourself and what you're willing to do, what you're willing not to do. And standing in that truth, it can be scary, however powerful, and there's a lot of freedom in it. But you have to get to that place. And everyone's path of getting there is going to look very different.
All right. Well, I want to switch over to the critical side of the podcast. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone in the audience, we're coming up on the hour mark. So if you have a question or a comment or you want to call in, now's the time. But I think you hinted at it just a little bit much earlier in the episode. But I had a friend of mine, a black guy from Virginia, on the podcast a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so. And we were talking about the perception of social work by black folks in Virginia. And he said that pretty much, for the most part, black people in Virginia don't trust social workers. And I mean, we've all heard many of the reasons. But what do you think I know it's a very broad question, but
It's
do you, what do you think about that idea today? Like, should people of color, I guess I don't want to put it so provocative like that, but like, what do you think the sentiment is? Do people of color trust social workers? Are there more black social workers, for example, around Philly? Like, what's the nature of that from your perspective?
um, it's a very loaded question. So it's
I
so
know, I'm
many layers
sorry.
to that. I'm trying to figure out. I'm like, wait a minute. So there are a couple of, I mean, if I had to think about my own personal experience of even being a Black woman as a social worker, there are not many. Most employment places that I've been the only one. And it wasn't until a former patient had brought it to my attention. He asked, he's like, why aren't there more Black therapists? And I really didn't know how to answer that at the time. The more I grew in the field, the more I realized that there's not that much help, uh, support. There's a lot of systemic things when it comes to licensing and barriers, and there's a lot more in social work, particularly, and some of the barriers around licensing and career development. So that's why I said it's a broad question. There's so many ways I could go with that. But even historically, with um, communities that not just Black people, but historically there are a lot of events that have occurred for there to be distrust in the healthcare community when it comes to um, those communities getting the treatment that they deserve and not getting it. So there's a lot more, I think, layers to that um, that I'm not all prepared to answer here, but that I'm thinking that are flying through my head of some of the facets. I think it goes a little bit further than just social workers, but healthcare providers in general. There's a big disconnect and disparity when it comes to healthcare. So I don't know if that will give any hint of answering that question, but if I had to look at Philly, it's just one city. I think it's a broader issue when it comes to healthcare in marginalized communities and how they're served, and distrust, and some of the historic systemic barriers, along with the stigma around it, around getting help. Social workers overall, we're like called the bottom feeders, right, of the healthcare profession. So changing the societal perception of what social work is, and not just that we are just child welfare workers or taking away children. Even for me in my profession, I know this is a little steering to the left of your question, but um, even for me, that was a mindset that I had when I switched from psychology to social work. The first thing I asked my advisor was, don't they take away kids? That's all they do? He said, no, social work is a lot more than that. And here I am 18 years later, a clinical social worker. So yeah, it's a lot more to that. I think so many layers to that question of some of the facets that contribute to distrust in the community, not just for social workers, but again, healthcare providers in general when it comes to marginalized communities.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate your answer. I don't think there's any, like you said, there's so many layers and so many ways
Hmm.
that you can go. And for me, I think like as far as this podcast, I just think it's something that's one area that we just need to talk about. I mean, like a lot of us have never even talked about things like that in social work. And so I think the more that we can talk about it and increase our understanding, the more we're going to be prepared to understand people, from a variety of backgrounds. For example, I think oftentimes Black folks or people of color, they would say a white person might perceive them as being hysterical or being, using their imagination and such things, instead of looking at them with empathy and saying like, hey, this may be grounded in real life experiences. Does that make sense? And so I think building
Hmm.
empathy and, telling these stories and talking about things brings us closer together in a social work. It brings us to be more equipped in order to handle such things, if that makes sense.
It does, but also the other piece of that is cultural bias. We all have our own biases as human beings, but and grounded in social work and a code of ethics, cultural competence has to be at the forefront. It's more than just a term that we got to know for an exam, but I think it's important when it comes to when someone comes to you for help, they're bringing their experiences, they're bringing their own bias, they're bringing their fears, they're bringing their own perceptions of you, and having to meet them where they are. But also, that's where good supervision comes in, good mentorship and leadership, to be able to train providers on making sure that they are aware of their own biases and how it can be a barrier to treating those that need help the most.
When you mentioned like finding a good super or having good supervision, What responsibility does the person receiving supervision have in that regard? Like, how do you find a good supervisor? How do you how do you ensure that you're receiving good supervision? Because I've seen bad
Oh,
supervision before.
that's another loaded question. Yes, there is. My experience of supervision, although it's mostly positive, was different. I think I've had every discipline in five different two LCSWs, MFT, LPC, psychiatrist, and a PsyD. So six supervisors that signed off on my hours to get my clinical license. Um, and it was quite an experience. There are bad supervisors, and there are a lot of good ones. I've been lucky enough to have many mentors that helped me along the way, that helped me cultivate a sense of my coming into my own um, as a professional. But when it comes to supervision, if you are at an agency, if you're collecting hours, um, sometimes you're kind of stuck with what the agency gives you, but you can also make sure that if that supervisor doesn't seem very suitable, find people that are where you want to be. That's going to take you being resourceful, finding, getting connected. If you're a student, getting connected to your state organization and ASW, there's a lot of resources there, and looking for mentorship and asking for it. So part is being proactive in that, because your supervisor is not going to have no supervisor, even it's not going to have everything you want. What I found even in the coaching world, it's good to find people in certain areas that are good at one thing and find someone that's good at something else. But in looking for guidance in the field, it's important to look at, are they someone that you can see yourself getting professional advice from, that you admire, that you trust. Those are key to building any type of good, strong clinical supervised experience. And can you see yourself learning from them? And can they learn from you? Because the other part is a good supervisor not only teaches their colleagues, but they also learn from them. They're human too. So it's important for them to keep learning, being in that role of leadership.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think those roles often switch. Like for a good example is I had a student who had me as his professor, and now he's receiving supervision from my wife, who just got done receiving her own supervision through group supervision. So those roles fluctuate. If you're going through supervision at some time, pay attention, because you very likely may be in that role at some point in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're coming up towards the end of the podcast, Shara. I want to thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I wanted to, before we close, I wanted to offer you up the opportunity. Do you have any last words or anything else you want to say?
I actually don't. My mind is quite blank. I think this is a great conversation. I hope people get whatever insights that they can from this. And I definitely enjoyed my time with you from Alaska. So this is, I think, good. I think that people get a lot of information. But just to everyone listening, take care of yourself and keep trying to put your mental health first. It can be very hard. Believe me, on most days, I don't always do it. But when I do put myself first, I'm a better mom, better partner, a better friend, a better business owner, better entrepreneur, better leader when I do. So I would hope that whatever capacity the listeners are in, to look at themselves and look at what they need first before they engage with their world. And we do that every time we open up our eyes. When we open our eyes, it's just us in our mind before we start engaging with the world or our partner or whoever. It's important to take those few minutes to collect ourselves before we do that, to check in and see how we're doing, So we got to put ourselves first. That's what I would say.
Yeah, put yourself first, everybody. Yeah, like I said, it's been a pleasure, Shara. I felt like it was a great conversation. I'll get this produced in the next week or so, and then I'll clip it out, and I'll be in touch, and I'll email those to you. And if you can, be sure to send me, like I said, the links to your books and anything else that you want me to put in there.
Will do. Well, thank you, and have a good time in Alaska. It's cold.
Yeah,
It's cold here. It's like 20 degrees. I'm not going nowhere.
yeah.
But take care of yourself.
All right, you too. It's been a pleasure. Have a good day.
You too. Bye
And
bye.
thanks to everyone in the audience. We'll see you later. Peace, everyone. This episode was recorded live on Saturday, December 20th, 2023. This episode featured Shara Ruffin and was hosted by Christian Ace Stettler. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, this has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. All right, everybody, until next time, keep being revolutionary. Peace.